Hi, I'm Chad from Oklahoma Overland. Many of you may know that at one point I, in the biggest way possible, messed up a low water crossing. Now, I did some driving today out north and west of Oklahoma City and came across a low water crossing that has many of the same characteristics of the one that got me in a big way. That was in that was in January of 2019 when I lost my blue Land Cruiser in a low water crossing on a freezing cold, snowy day in southeast Kansas. So I'm gonna walk down here to this low water crossing and talk about what makes it somewhat similar and why this one is actually maybe a little less deceptive than the one that got me. So we're gonna walk past the water crossing first and then come back at it so we're not filming directly into the sun. So I'm walking east on this county road. This is a kind of 2-track dirt county road, not wide enough for 2 cars to pass each other and still be in the tracks that are typical. So I'm going to start talking about it from right here and give you a little look at this water crossing. So we can see that we're definitely going uphill. There's big cuts on either side to get to the water crossing. We can see that it's a concrete bottom, as was the one that got me. And finally we can see that on the upstream side it is fairly shallow, but on the downstream side it's been pretty washed out and dropped off. So the water crossing that got me was similar to this in some ways, except this cut down to it was much steeper. And right here where the concrete begins, I found out afterwards, was washed out pretty substantially. So as I started into the water crossing and got to about where I'm standing right now, the front of my vehicle dipped considerably deeper than expected, all the way up to the top of my hood on the grill. And at that point I made the very poor decision to, instead of stopping and putting it in reverse and aborting the water crossing, I put the pedal to the metal. So at that point where I'm standing on this water crossing, the water would have been about 4 feet deep. As we can see, if there's 4 feet of water where I'm standing in the middle of this, on the upstream side the water's about 6 or 8 feet deep if I had went off the side on upstream. On downstream side we're talking about the water being very significantly deeper. About halfway through the crossing, my rear of my vehicle floated. And here's where I came to my second big mistake of my attempted water crossing. The second big mistake is the Land Cruiser is an all-wheel drive system with the ability to lock the center differential, creating more of a true 4-wheel drive. And I had failed to lock my center differential, which means when the rear came up off this pavement, the result was I lost all traction because all the power went to the wheels with the least traction, which were my rear wheels. At that point, the vehicle weather vaned into the water, into the stream, upstream. And the reason it did that is because the front tires were still on the ground and the back was floating. Then the front floated. And now, for a moment, I was making forward progress. But just for a moment. And then my engine hydrolocked. Thankfully, there was some good decisions made. My son, who was in the passenger seat, had rolled down his passenger window. And having rolled down his passenger window, the vehicle had started to rotate again in the water. And this time, it rotated with the front of the vehicle. I'm sorry, it hadn't rotated yet. We had started to make progress. Engine hydrolocked. My son, who was now facing the other side of the water crossing out his window, made the good decision, along with my encouragement, to go out the window and get to shore. As he left the vehicle turned around in the stream. And now I'm floating downstream. So this water crossing shares many of the same characteristics. The stream turns right going downstream. And the stream turned right on the crossing where I was. And there's this big washed out bank on what would be stream left. That's if we're flowing downstream, the left side of the stream. And my vehicle ended up where there's a sandbar in the river here, along that big embankment. There was a very large tree, a snag, that had fallen and gotten wedged there. And my vehicle ended up wedged up against that, up against the side. You get out that way. So I headed for the back of the vehicle. And in the very back of the vehicle, I grabbed the latch to release the lift gate. And as I grabbed that latch to release the lift gate and pulled, nothing happened. And panic hit me. And I looked down and learned in that moment that there was a manual lock switch on that back liftgate handle. And I thank the Toyota engineer that put that there. And I popped the liftgate. And the tailgate portion, the water had just gotten up to it. And I went out the liftgate into the water. It was icy cold. I really don't remember much from the time I entered the water until I was standing about here on the other side. And my son was standing there, and very rightly was freaking out. Told me he had been considering getting into the water to try to help me. Thankfully, he didn't make that decision. And he had a cotton hoodie on, and I had a Marmot Dry Climb wind shirt on. And he stripped the cotton hoodie off, knowing that in this 34 degrees and wet snow that was falling, that was the wrong thing to be wearing. And we traded that Dry Climb wind shirt back and forth as we walked, soaking wet. As we got to about this point on the road, we could see a rural mail truck, and that rural mail truck turned around and drove away. And we kept hiking, and we came to another small water crossing that we had to ford. On the other side of the water crossing, there was finally a farmhouse. And we were so cold. But that farmhouse had no vehicles apparent out front, and 2 very large dogs that didn't want us anywhere near that house. So we kept going, freezing and soaking. And we came to a small community. And the first house we went to had a car. And we banged on that door and rang the doorbell. And dogs barked, but no people ever came. And there was a trailer house that was the next house we came to, in all sorts of disrepair. But I knocked on the door, and a man came to the door, and I asked if I could use the phone. And he brought me the phone out to the porch. And I called my wife. And his wife, seeing 2 soaking a young man and an old man standing on their front porch soaking wet, insisted that he let us in the house. And they put us in front of a heater and gave us blankets. And my wife came about 20 or 30 minutes later and picked us up and took us to town, where my son took a hot shower first, and then I did. And then we started the long recovery process of figuring out what to do next, beginning with a call to my car insurance company. And that is the story of my messed up water crossing. And I'll look at another water crossing that's somewhat similar, and talking about how not to make the same mistakes. Later that night, we went and checked on the vehicle, and this is what we saw. Just the rooftop tent sticking up out of the water. The next morning we went to check on things, and the water had come down quite a bit, as you can see. But the real insult to injury with all of this was what we found once the vehicle had been recovered by the tow truck company. In the 3 days it took them to recover the vehicle due to water levels and my insurance issues, somebody had destroyed my Land Cruiser. It had been rolled over, the wheels and tires stolen, the rooftop tent was gone, all the glass was broken, and this was the end of a vehicle that I had owned for a couple of years and had taken me all over the United States.